All right, everybody, welcome to another live cast here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. As always, I am Josh Bycer. And our guest tonight, he is from the website psychologyofgames.com. He has also written books about how psychology and game design intersect. Please welcome Jamie Madigan.
Hello, Internet.
Hey, Jamie, it's great to have you back on. I think we spoke like 2 years ago, I think just as we were starting out.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's
I
uh, it's always fun to come back on.
Yep, it's great to have you. So, I guess to get things started with, how has everything been for you since we last spoke? Have you written any books or done anything else along those lines?
Gosh, that was about 2 years ago. It's
Yeah.
just kind of been more of the same. It's just kind of been busy, been keeping up the Psychology Games podcast and the website, trying to just keep things going there, and with the Patreon, and trying to stick to a good schedule. Haven't posted any new books, haven't gone on any tours or done any really big speaking engagements, just sort of little things here and there, like our local video game conventions and festivals in my town. But just playing a lot of games, trying to stay on top of that.
I know that's the never-ending challenge right there.
Yeah.
As I was telling you on email and for the folks watching, I just posted or proposed a book idea to a publisher about game design. So at
Yep.
this moment, fingers are crossed that they'll decide to go forward with it, and then maybe I'll be going on book tours and all of that at some point in the future.
That's cool. I'll follow you around like fish or something. And
Nice.
yeah.
There you go. And since we last spoke, a lot has happened with the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. We are now pushing 3,000 subscribers, and
Awesome.
ton of new folks on. So I guess for them, if for people who haven't heard about you, Jamie, could you give everyone kind of the primer about what Psychology of Games is?
Sure. So I write and podcast at psychologyofgames.com. And basically, what I try to do is look at the psychology literature, all different sort of corners of that discipline, covering social psychology, cognitive psychology, organizational, psychology of decision making, behavioral economics, all that kind of stuff, and talk about where it overlaps with things like game design, the way that games are marketed, the way that gamers behave when we play games, and sort of what effects they have or don't have on us. So I kind of, my role is to popularize the use of psychology in understanding and making video games. So that's kind of my mission with the website and with the podcast.
Awesome. And I know we spoke about this 2 years ago, but what is the name of your book for anyone watching who may want to pick that up?
Sure. It's called Getting Gamers: The Psychology of Video Games and Their Impact on the People Who Play Them. And you can find it on Amazon or anywhere else that you order books. They'll have it, or you can go to psychologyofgames.com/book and get lots of information on more information on the contents and sort of the different topics that I cover, and find out where to buy it there.
Great. And I know when we last spoke, we were discussing things in terms of like kind of the allure of MMO design and the
Mm,
different kinds of players there. And since then, things have certainly taken an interesting turn. I'm sure you're no doubt aware of the whole push towards loot boxes and that kind of
what?
micro monetization.
It's preposterous. This is the first I've heard of it. Tell me everything.
Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
you've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I get people contacting me every couple of weeks at this point, saying I'm writing an article or I'm doing a school project or something along those lines. So it's definitely sort of almost replaced the violence in video games as the big question. Although lately that came back around as well.
Oh
So
yeah, I know just the other night, I think Jim Sterling did a video. Again, for those of you watching this recorded, it'll probably be a few weeks, but he did a whole video about people are now complaining about Fortnite and it being too
mm.
violent for people.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. But, yeah, of course, the loot box argument has been a major push, especially the last year, or 2017 seemed to be the kind of watershed moment for a
Right.
lot of developers and consumers as well, with every major AAA game having some form of loot box monetization. Now, the last time we spoke about this from a design standpoint, I was speaking with Ramin Shokrazad, the
Hmm.
noted game economist, and he talked about things from an economic point of view. But
Oh, cool.
I want to get your thoughts on this, Jamie, from a psychological point of view in terms of what exactly makes these loot boxes attractive. Now, obviously, for those of you watching this live right now, I have certainly spoke about this at length. But I figure someone with probably a much larger pedigree than myself can maybe
Wow.
add some interesting discussions there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as complicated a question as a lot of people think. It's just we like getting random rewards
Mm-hmm.
and we like getting nice surprises. And so when, you open a loot box and you know that you have a chance of getting something really great out of it or something you really want or something that's going to be extremely useful or valuable, then that's thrilling. And you get that sort of thrill of the expectation of the loot box, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some research to suggest that it's not actually getting the thing, but it's sort of the anticipation in the last few seconds as you go through the opening animation between clicking it and getting the thing out of the
Mm-hmm.
loot box that's the most appealing. But that I think that's really what it's about, is that we like pleasant surprises, and loot boxes allow us to do that. And then there's some psychology around the fringes of how loot boxes are presented. And I wrote about this some on Psychology of Games. There's different things that developers can do to maybe make you more or less likely to lose track of how much you've spent or how many loot boxes you've opened, different ways that they can frame your progress towards opening loot boxes or earning loot boxes. Things like Overwatch does that really well, and the what's the MOBA from Blizzard, the Heroes of the
Yeah.
Storm, does it really well. A lot of games do it well, but
Mm-hmm.
it can also annoy people to an
I know.
extent if they lean on it too hard.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we really saw over 2017 with a lot of the
Hmm.
major studios going after it. And when I spoke with Armin about it, it definitely falls on that line between being both an economic design issue and, of course, as you just said, more on the psychological conditioning of saying, here's some random box all sparkly and new. Click on it, you may get some amazing thing. But you
Right.
enjoy it? Well, now open 100 more of those boxes and see what else you get.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't have a problem with loot boxes in principle. I like them in
Mm-hmm.
my Overwatch, and it's a good incentive to keep playing and try different things. But I think when like you introduce the pay to win
Mm-hmm.
mechanic, where you pay and you get things out of loot boxes that give you advantages over other human players, well, that's when people kind of start to get upset and start to look askance and
Yeah.
have perceptions about fairness that bleed into their larger judgments about the game and how much they're enjoying it.
And that perception of fairness actually brings me to a very interesting question for you, Jamie. One of the more interesting conversations regarding loot boxes and just monetization in general is the
Hmm.
idea between free to play versus a retail experience. And we hear this from a lot of gamers where they'll say, I'm more than happy to loot boxes in a MOBA or in a mobile or a free to play game. That's fine. Hit me with as many as you like. But the
Yeah.
second you put them in a 40 or 50 or $60 game, it goes to high hell. I guess, is that like, what do you think, I guess, makes that work? Or why do you think people perceive loot boxes like differently depending upon what the game is versus what they're actually providing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, did I pay for this game and do I expect to have a complete experience because I paid full price for it?
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to, get me for 99 cents at a time here and there. It's kind of annoying. And then there's also the question of like, well, is the game balanced to encourage me to buy loot boxes even though I paid full price for it? Which is something that like Shadow of War ran into last year, where it seemed like the end game, especially in that game,
Mm-hmm.
was required so much grinding if you didn't want to shell out money for loot boxes to try to unlock some of the more powerful orcs for your army. And so it comes down to a perception of, does this give other players an unfair advantage over me or me over them? And is the game designed or balanced in such a way that it's encouraging me to or requiring me to pay additional money for it when I already paid what I think is a fair price.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some games like like Shadow of War, where it seemed kind of obnoxious and it's in your face all the time, and the Star Wars Battlefront game was like that as well. And then you've got other ones where it's like a Assassin's Creed Origins, where it's sort of tucked away and it's there if you want to dig for it and
Mm-hmm.
unlock some currency or some crafting materials or whatever, but it's not sort of presented as something that's required or something that's a core part of the game.
Yeah. I think that's a major point there, Jamie. That, as you said a few minutes ago, regarding that perception, that once people start to think that your game is rigged or
Hmm.
the scales are tilted against them, then it doesn't even matter if you didn't do it that way. That perception is real. Again, I'm sure you've never played a game like XCOM or Darkest Dungeon where, 80% chance of hit and I miss. The game must obviously be broken right there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It that happens. We're not very good with random chance. And once you've got that idea in your head that, oh, this happened because they want me to buy a loot box, you start seeing it
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere in the game, and the confirmation bias, takes over, and you start to pay more attention to the things that confirm that suspicion, and you ignore or downplay the things that might argue against it.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't even have to be the case. It's because if the perception is there, then that sort of defines our experience and our judgment about
Yep.
the game.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that can really kill a multiplayer community, as we've
Mm,
seen before with the idea of like if an arms race gets developed. Even if the player, like I said this before, but for a lot of the multiplayer games, it's always kind of like you have the low tier, the mid tier, and then you have the competitive elite. Your legendary status in Hearthstone, your top 500 players,
right.
and even like the low levels, they'll start to feel like, what chance do I have to play if I know so and so spent $5,000 on cards or booster packs? I might as
Hmm.
well just give up now because I'm never going to get to that point.
Yep, yep, totally. And I think what's interesting is we also have those perceptions about people that just spend so much time grinding things out or earning experience or
Mm-hmm.
even not necessarily getting better at the game, but earning loot that helps them do better or have more options.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing, but it's just a different cause or a different mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Now, Indy in chat asked us a few minutes ago, but he was talking about preferring a pay for convenience system versus a
Okay.
pay to win. And this actually, I think, kind of leads into our discussion later about motivating someone to play, but I think it could also work here. I want to ask you about this, Jamie. As I'm sure you're no doubt aware of, I'm sure the chat is, many free to play games will purposely, push the scales in a direction to make the game harder to play or more inconvenient to play to
Mm-hmm.
try and motivate you to spend money. Whether it's limiting inventory space, having a number of times you can play a map per day,
Mm-hmm.
even stuff as crazy as limited friends lists or not able to contact someone unless you're a premium member or stuff like that.
Right.
And I want to get your thoughts about this. Like, does that kind of convenience or I guess accessibility purchases, do they really work, or do you think they do more harm than good to the perception of the game?
If you're talking about a free to play thing where the expectation is that you're going to have a limited experience if you don't put any money into it, I think I kind of agree with that person that the convenience uh, is a good way to go because you're not necessarily having a different experience than somebody else that pays more money or less money. You're just having more or less of it. So those cooldown timers, or can't activate this ability or grow a new crop or train a new unit or whatever until you pay. That's kind of annoying, but the I know I've encountered free to play games before that just said like, "Hey, you've played the number of matches you can play today,
Mm-hmm.
but spend 5 purple diamonds or whatever to be able to play more." That's fine. If I'm enjoying the game and I want to play, I'll kick a few dollars in. They're stupid purple diamonds or whatever. And if I'm not having fun and if I have better alternatives, then I will pursue those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've just never been a fan of those convenience microtransactions. I think it goes back to what we just said in terms
Mm,
of the difference between people who play full titles versus someone who's just used to the free to play market. Again, for us older gamers, it used to be $50 and one and done. We never have to spend any more money.
Right.
And like as you just said, if the game is annoying or you don't like it, you can just go do something else. And I found myself doing that very quickly with a lot of mobile and free to play games. And it can become very hard, I think, to get someone to make that initial purchase. And I am sure there have been many studies and conferences in mobile games regarding, how do push someone over that edge to get them to spend anything from like 50 cents to even like $50 on one of their games.
Yeah, those people have data on everything. I'm sure they studied all that sort of stuff, but they don't tend to publish that research
Mm,
publicly.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if a game these days, when I have such little time to play games and I can only play in like 30, 60-minute chunks, if a
Mm-hmm.
game says like, "Yo, you've played enough today," I'm like, "Thanks, video game. That's good to know. I'm gonna call it quits for the night instead of like playing for another 4 hours."
Mm-hmm. And Indy asked in chat, are there any ways to make purchases fair to people? And I think that's a very tricky concept because again, it's always that give and take between how does the developer make money and how does the
Yeah.
consumer get a fair purchase or a fair transaction.
Yeah, I'm not sure what fair means in that context. I mean, usually it just means that the exchanges are equitable and you get what you expect to get.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think if they move the goalposts to have something like, oh, you paid $1, but at level 10 where you are now it costs $2 to do the same thing. Like that would strike me as unfair because uh, you're changing the deal. You're sort of
Yeah.
changing my expectations, and I always expected to be able to do what I did the first time,
Mm-hmm.
unless you made it clear.
Yeah.
So I think maybe one way to make things more clear, and you saw places like iTunes do this, and even like the old Xbox system where you would pay, you would buy things. You used to have like what are they called, like Microsoft points,
Yeah.
and they had like the weird conversion factor, like you'd spend $20 and you'd get like 42 and 8/13ths of a Microsoft point or something weird, and you never knew like when something cost 300 Microsoft points like how many dollars that was, and they went to a straight dollar system, and that way it was a lot fairer. It was a lot easier to understand like how much money you were spending on something, how much money you would have left over, how
Mm-hmm.
much money you needed, how many Microsoft points you needed to buy, or how much
Mm-hmm.
credit you needed to buy. And that's one thing that's kind of always annoyed me about mobile games and games with in-game
Mm-hmm.
transactions is that when they use like these purple diamonds or Smurf berries or gold coins or whatever it is that are on these weird exchange rates,
Oh
and
yes.
it's like when you travel and you spend current foreign currency, right? So there's been studies that show that when people do that, they tend to overspend because they can't keep track of how much they're spending. They don't bother to do the mental math to do the conversions between the foreign currency and the one that they're used to. Same thing with people using credit cards to make purchases. People tend to make purchases more because there's sort
Mm-hmm.
of a temporal separation between the pain of paying the bill and the pleasure of getting the thing that you want. So when you get to defer that pain of losing the money or paying that bill,
Mm-hmm.
you take more pleasure. You
Yep.
make more purchases. So, in a lot of ways, using a purple diamond to buy something in video games is akin to like using a credit card, but more, like
Yeah.
times five.
Mm-hmm.
So that would definitely be one way to make things, I think, more fair, or at least appear more fair. Make it appear less like the game is trying to take advantage of you, as
Yeah.
if they remove those barriers to keeping track of how much you spent.
Mm-hmm. And I know the same thing with the credit card. I remember my first credit card. I did that very same thing of spending a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot. And again, as you're right, when they obscure the costs, it makes it a lot harder to keep track of it. And he was also asking, does it feel fair for the purchasers and non-purchasers? And we got a few comments in chat about that as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
for myself, as Oscar is saying, I think you have to be careful about selling advantages when you're doing
Yeah.
that because that I think just completely throws your economy out the window. It was one of the best things I thought Team Fortress did with the fact that they just did the whole side grades. I think another big point is I'm not a fan of random purchases. I mean, I'm fine getting random gifts. I love when I get my loot box in Overwatch, or I'm playing
Mm-hmm.
Vermintide 2 right now, my little commendation chest at the end of a
Oh, me
battle.
too. Yeah.
But I don't want to spend $1 or $2 per box and then have it completely be up to the fates or, as we all know, the game engine to decide what I'm actually getting at the end of it.
Yep. Yeah. I love the Overwatch system of earning loot boxes as you level up and do challenges in the arcade. But I think one time I plunked down $5 and got however many chests and opened them all and just like, well, I didn't get anything that I wanted.
Yeah,
That was not satisfying, and I haven't bought one yet. I don't know what
yeah.
I was expecting. I should have been able to foresee that outcome, but yeah, it's the random nature of it is no fun. That's why, when I go to Vegas, I only go like for the shows and the food and everything else. I don't tend to gamble when I go to casinos or places like that either.
Yeah. I basically set like a $50 limit when I go to like a casino, and that's about it. And so far, I've walked away with $0. So it's not like you're not going to be seeing me on the poker channels anytime soon. There.
Yeah, at least hopefully you got $50 worth of entertainment while playing the games.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think that's actually a really good point there, Jimmy, that I wanted to expand on about putting a price on value, or putting a price on these purchases or on gameplay itself. Because this is, I think, as you said a few minutes ago, with regarding how these purchases become obscured. I mean, free to play games is definitely one of the most obscuring elements of here. Because
Mm,
obviously, you and I, we could both play the same free to play game. I could spend $0 on it and get one experience. You could spend $200, $100, whatever, and get a different experience. And the question
hmm
is, who got more value out of that game? And it's very hard to do that. I mean, hell, there are probably podcasts waiting for us to talk about in terms of just what exactly is the right price per game design. I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of indie developers would love that.
Yeah. I mean, when you talked to The Economist earlier,
Hmm.
they may have touched on this, but there's a reason why whenever economists talk about that sort of thing, they put subjective
Hmm.
utility, because it is subjective.
Yeah.
Like the different experiences that people have will vary from person to person in terms of like how much utility or more specifically like enjoyment or pleasure that somebody gets out of something. And everybody's curve, is different in terms of like when it passes from being pleasurable to painful and all of that stuff, which is why economists and other people that deal with those kind of data look at groups instead of individuals, and they kind of try to say like, okay, like for our target audience or for the people that are playing our game, here's the kind of experiences, here's where we can time things so that we get the most uh, you know enjoyment or utility. People get the most utility and fun out of playing the game, and we can't make that pleasurable for everybody. Some people are going to bail early. Some people are going to hang on for what is frankly a disturbing long period of time, and play our games for a frightening number of hours. But we can try to kind of hit the biggest target that we can.
Hmm. Let me see. Just had a thought there. I just lost it. Microtransactions being cosmetic, pay you time with money, which is true. Um, Here's the question. I think Dark Lab was saying, I'm not sure he was just asking this as a real question or just throwing it out there, but regarding considering loot boxes or digital downloads as a form of gambling. This was another one of those big take
Mm.
questions of 2017. What did you think of the whole argument there, Jamie?
Um, I don't know. I think that you look at them, yeah, it's technically gaming. You're paying gambling. You're paying money for something to roll the dice, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get. So it's gambling in the same sense that like opening a pack of Pokemon cards is gambling, or baseball cards, or a blind box toy, or something like that. I think that gets oversold in the media. About the dangers of loot boxes as a form of gambling, and that they're getting people addicted to playing these games and it's ruining lives. That makes for sensational
Oh,
headlines.
yes.
And I think it oversells the state of research on gaming addiction, which is still very early and still very poorly understood. But what we do know, or what good research has been done, shows that if gaming addiction is real, then it's extremely rare, and that the new Star Wars Battlefront game has not created a generation of gambling addicts. Stuff like that gets overstated and tossed around for fun, for hyperbole, for the sake of discussion. But when you look at the actual research on it, and I had an actual researcher on my podcast to talk about this a few months ago, and they kind of say, well, yeah, things like loot boxes are annoying for various reasons, many of which we've just discussed. But gambling addiction is probably not in the cards, if you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah, and again, it's very hard when we talk about these aspects that. Oh, okay, about gambling. Was that? Are you talking about Ramin Oscar? I'll wait for him.
No.
Or I'm thinking he was talking about one of my casts, but we'll see. There's that 10-second delay. But the point I was getting at, one of the hardest things to talk about when it comes to the addictive nature of game design, I know we brought this up, I think the last time you were on, Jamie, is that video games, in terms of the best games out there, are meant to hook players. If a game
Hmm.
wasn't great, nobody would play to begin with. I mean, there's a reason why the chat's been talking about Fortnite. There's a reason why people have been playing Fortnite consistently. There's a reason why I'm playing Vermintide 2.
It's because it's free.
That's another big part of it, too. But the best
And a
game.
good game.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But the best games out there are designed around, pulling those strings to get you invested and to keep you playing. Again, there's a
Hmm.
whole reason why the Civilization series coined that phrase, just one more turn, and they did the whole, Civ Anonymous videos back in the day. But
Yeah.
I think this may have been part of a question asked earlier, but I guess in your opinion, Jamie, is there such a thing as ethical monetization? Or is there, like, at what point does it cross that line into something that's either malicious or just anti consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can give you a real specific answer
Mm-hmm.
there. I'm sure it varies from case to case. I think that obviously, if you do anything deceptive, if you pull bait and switches, if you make changes to the game that take away things that people paid for, content that people paid for, if you change things so drastically that what the thing that somebody paid for is no longer valuable, then that starts to get into some pretty questionable territory. But then also, like, how far do you go in balancing patches, for example? Like, oh no, you nerfed my favorite
Mm-hmm.
hero that I paid money to unlock. Uh, you know, but it was done. It was necessary because of balance reasons or because of some other unforeseen type of thing. So I wouldn't say that every case like that is unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm just not sure I have a more specific answer than that. As long as you're, not being deceptive and uh, people understand what they're getting into, then I think that's ethical. If you're making the choice about whether or not you want to buy the thing and you understand what you're buying and you get what you bought, then that seems like a pretty straightforward transaction to me.
Yeah. And I think, as you said a few minutes ago, that it's not so cut and dry when it comes to microtransactions and loot boxes in terms of what they're actually offering the player. Because I'm sure you've heard of gamers who, the second they hear the loot box or microtransactions, they go,
Mm,
completely off the reservation there in terms of hating the game. But
right.
when it's done properly, as you say, when people are transparent, it does soften that blow. Really good example that I tried out earlier in 2017 was Warframe. I finally got a chance to play after years of it being out. And
That's like a stupidly popular game that I've never heard of. I learned recently, but yeah.
I'm sure Oscar's about to type a small paragraph because he's the one who got me into playing it. But they feature just a incredibly extensive in-game store. I mean, you have almost everything, both cosmetic and gameplay altering, available for purchase.
Mm,
But at the same time, everything is available to earn in game.
yep.
So you are free to do as much or as little spending as you want, and you can still make progress. And they are, of course, 100% transparent about, what you're buying with this money. It's not like you're going to buy something and you have no idea. It's not like you're buying a loot box or some random reward. If it says spend $2.99 on this badass crossbow shotgun, I give them $2.99. I get a badass crossbow shotgun, and everybody's happy.
Yeah. That sounds like they're doing it right then, to the extent that what you describe is the whole picture. Yeah.
Hmm. Now I'm trying to think if there. I was thinking if there's anything else before we talk a little bit more about. I figure we'll ease off a little bit about some of the games we've played, and then we'll get back to motivation for the third and probably the final part of our cast. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to bring up regarding just like free to play or that kind of thing. Do you
So
have
maybe
anything on your
why
end?
well maybe why way kind of a way of transition or segue into that. You mentioned like, oh, I see a game that has microtransactions, and I turn my head and walk away. I don't necessarily do that because that would cut out too many games that I actually want to play. But I do have sort of the inverse of that, which is a positive reaction when I see a game that doesn't have in-game purchases or loot boxes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Monster Hunter World is a game that I played recently, and I really appreciated that the game was like super grindy, right? Like you have to go on these hunts over and over and
Oh
over
yes.
again, and get crafting materials and get to the thing that you want to, the armor set or the weapon that you want to craft, and it takes forever. But there's like not ever an opportunity for you to simply buy those materials outright, or to buy an item that increases the chance that you'll get rare materials, or to do any other kind of in-game purchases. Like I think somebody told me it might have like some cosmetic stuff later on that I never actually got to. But the point being that it doesn't offer you a way to buy your way through or around the core aspect of the game, which I actually really appreciated and I really enjoyed. And then Vermintide 2 is another game that I don't think there's any way to put additional money into that game, even though it is also sort of based around playing the same levels over and over again and grinding out better and better gear to increase your level so that you can play harder difficulties to increase your gear to play harder difficulties and increase your level and over again. But you're never just given the opportunity to you know buy treasure chests or commendation chests or anything like that. You have to actually earn them by playing the game. So when I see that sort of stuff, I'm actually more interested in a game than I would be if it had those sorts of in-game purchases.
Yeah. And as you just said, Jamie, it would have been very easy for games like Monster Hunter and Vermintide 2 to have those kinds of systems. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Battlefront 2 did, and then they walked back, then they came back with, and now they're doing some kind of crazy mess with that system. And
Yeah.
it is very interesting to see games, and actually, that will probably be a good segue in a few minutes to talk about motivation. But the games that they are built on grinding. Again, you're not going to play Monster Hunter for 10 minutes a day and see everything.
Nope.
Same goes for Vermintide too. They want you to play them for the long haul. And getting people invested enough to play that can be very challenging. And Dark Lab mentioned in chat, I guess, as the counter example, Metal Gear Survive, where they wanted you to pay $10 for an additional save slot. That
Oh my
sounds
gosh.
very nice right there.
Yeah. Pass.
But it's very interesting about some of these games that we've seen that have tried to avoid that temptation. I think a lot of it could be them just knowing, seeing the smoke signs from developers from like Battlefield, or I'm sorry, Battlefront 2 and the like. And I guess besides
Could be.
Vermintide and Monster Hunter, are there any other games you've had a chance to play lately?
So I just started playing Far Cry 5 yesterday, and I'm maybe like 5 or 6 hours in.
Oh, that's a good one for talking about motivating someone to keep doing something. Because the open
Yeah.
world genre certainly does its best to keep you playing them. We jokingly call it the Upin world design, when it's just like you look at the map and there's like 900 different little marks and widgets and shiny things on there. Say, hey, go look at this, go do that.
Yeah, although Far Cry 5, have you played it at
No,
all?
I haven't had a
Okay.
chance.
So it switches that formula up a little bit and does a better job of just instead of just vomiting like icons all over the world map, like you got in other Ubisoft games, like Assassin's
Oh
Creed games,
yes.
got really bad about
Oh
that.
yes.
And even previous Far Cry games where you would like climb a tower and then it's just like bleh, here's like 50 different icons of side quests and activities and rescue missions that you can go do. Far Cry 5, um, there's no towers for the first time in a long time.
Shocking, I
Uh,
bet, to a lot of people.
I know, right? And there's even like a point in the tutorial where you climb like a radio tower, and like the guy who's like in your ear on the radio is like, "Now don't worry, I'm not going to have you climbing a bunch of towers." So they even kind of like poke fun at themselves in the very early minutes of the game doing that. But instead, like you will just walk around town and talk to like an NPC, and they'll be like, "Oh, there's this old guy that lives out in the hills, and I'm worried about him. Somebody should go see if he's okay." And then blip, like a icon will appear on your mini
Mm.
map to go check on that guy. Even like just completing side quests or quests, then as you talk to people, will open up additional stuff. Or sometimes you'll just be wandering around in the woods, and something will pop up as a side quest that you can do. So it is much more measured in how it distributes that stuff instead of just doing it in giant chunks,
Mm-hmm.
which I find a lot more fun, and it sort
Yeah.
of it creates a sense of exploration
Mm-hmm.
much better than the other methods that Ubisoft has used for its open world games.
Yeah, I like that measured approach as well because I've played many games. Like, I'll give you an example. I just played a press kit that was sent me for a space game.
Mhm.
I don't want to name the game because I don't want people to rag on it, but it was again one of those games where there's like a 5 minute tutorial. I finish it and then it goes, okay, here's the map and here's 10,000 star systems and
Yeah.
stations and trading ports. I'm like, I just learned how to move my ship from
Close.
yeah, I just learned to move my ship from one stage into another. I don't even know what everything does yet.
Yeah, there's a reason why terms like on ramping and orientation get tossed around by good game designers. Like, you got to ease players into that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I'm slowly but surely working my way through Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I finally got a
Uh,
Switch, and that game is just like completely blowing me away in terms of how they handle the
mhm.
open world design.
Yeah, there's another one that doesn't use, I mean, it has towers, right? But
Hmm.
you kind of find things to do by finding them in the world, and
That
you
just
can look.
shocked me right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool system as well, and I liked it as well. I need to go back to that game. I played a bunch of it last year, and then sort of set it aside to play other stuff. So thanks for reminding me. I need to add that to my list.
Yeah, I need to get back to that. I need to at some point pick up Monster Hunter World
Yeah, you
and
do.
maybe Far Cry 5, and by like 2021 I'll be able to get around to that one.
Yeah, it'll wait.
Yeah.
By the time Far Cry 6 or Far Cry Primal 2, who knows what time that stuff coming out.
Maybe we'll
Get
get
grab it on a Steam sale.
maybe we'll get Blood Dragon 2 at some point
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, they're doing crazy stuff with their DLC this time, where it's like a bunch of Blood Dragon type stuff. This like wacky, crazy DLC that you can play that's totally different from the Far Cry 5 main game. So
Hmm.
I might actually pick up the season pass for that,
Oh
which is something I
no.
hardly ever do. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of games I need to try out, at some point I won't really try out Dragon Ball Fighter Z, but
Mm,
I am a horrible fighting game player to begin with, so there's no way I'm investing $60 in a game like that. I'll wait,
yeah.
hopefully, until it goes down in sales, but who knows, because it's been doing really well.
Yeah. I haven't played it. I watched some Twitch streams of it, but it seems to do really, really well, which makes sense. I mean, that's the perfect IP for a fighting game, right?
Oh,
They have
yes.
dozens of different characters they can put in there and different versions of those characters. So yeah, I hear it's doing well.
For sure. Now, I think with that, we're going to be hitting about 40 minutes into the cast. For those of you watching this live, we've set a hard stop point at around an hour and a half, but we're going to try to go between an hour and a half for the cast because I don't want to keep Jamie all night long.
Got some
And
Far Cry to play.
Exactly. And I have some Darksiders to get back to too. So, oh yeah, King Me just sent chat fires these over $100 with the DLC and passes. So, I think with that, let's segue into our main topic then. And that is motivating someone to play a game or keep them playing. Because this
Hmm.
is obviously one of the biggest pushes and pulls when it comes to game design. And there are a lot of ways to get someone invested, and there are a lot of ways to push them away. And
Hmm.
continuing our chat from a few minutes ago regarding Vermintide and Monster Hunter, I think that's a good place to start for this section. And
Hmm.
I want to get your thoughts on this, Jamie, with your background, some of the research you've done. Games that are grind centric, as in you're repeating the same content, maybe you're making it a little bit harder, maybe there's a few more objectives, but it's really more about the persistence rather than the actual gameplay in terms of what you're doing. And
Hmm.
Payday 2 being another really great example, where I'm repeating the same heist, but this time I'm using a better gun, or I have a different skill build. So, my question for you is, what do you think keeps people playing these games? Where I know this map is going to go the same way the fifth time as it will the 500th time, but
Hmm.
I'm still playing the game.
Yeah, I just mean in terms of why people do that,
Yeah, like
or
that kind of
what's appealing to it.
motivation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, a game like Vermintide, I think it is more about progression and building up your character and working towards like unlocking new perks and new abilities and new weapons, especially when you get into like the top tier of the weapons. They start having, weird effects. Like if you drink a potion, the other player nearest you gets the benefit of that potion too, and try and just kind of find new builds based on that stuff that you can do. The main reason that I, kept playing it so much was really to do that and to try to level up, my characters. I mained the elf lady first and got her up to level 25 and got, you know, uh, felt like I pretty much got everything out of her that I wanted. And then I moved on to one of the other classes and started to level them up. So that's mainly what it was, and also just to kind of learn the maps. There's a lot of nooks and crannies
Oh
and hidden
yes.
stuff like the tomes and the grimoires and the places where you can find the loot dice to get better loot. That stuff was fun to learn where that is, and it was kind of emergent with that game because normally what I would do is just something like that. I'd hit up YouTube, right, just to learn where everything was. But in Vermintide too, I enjoyed actually watching other players like find the stuff or show me where it was. So there was learning more about the map that way. With Monster Hunter, it was really about the gear
Mm-hmm.
and sort of hunting and getting crafting components there. Because pretty much the loop for Monster Hunter World for me was identifying a armor set that I wanted that I thought looked cool on my character, and then grinding out investigations and answering SOS calls until I got enough equipment to get that. And then I would get that armor and love it, and then I would play the next story mission, and it would introduce a new monster who had a even cooler looking set of armor, and then I would go and just grind out investigations until I had enough crafting to build that thing, and then I'd play the next story mission, and so on and so on. And that loop was really tight for me, and it worked for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
To keep me playing, and then additional stuff for my little Palico cat, and being able to outfit him with all kinds of funny and cute little armor sets was fun as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really about um, learning, or not so much learning the game, but getting that next armor set. Although I did a couple of times like decide to switch weapons. I mean, like, I'm going to learn how to use the bow, or I'm going to learn how to use the switchblade, or the charge blade, or whatever it was, and being able to sort of get more out of the game that way was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I'm the same way when I play a lot of games. I've said this before, like that carrot on the stick in terms of progression really does pull a lot of people through these games. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we can talk even about games like XCOM, with the whole idea of upgrading your squaddies from basic troops to, fully leveled up super soldiers fighting aliens.
Right.
And It's that motivation of the power progression. And going back to what we were saying earlier regarding monetization, that developers know that power is a very effective progression model for people. And it can be very hard to separate the gameplay from the monetizations in that aspect. And it's another reason why games that are grind centric still tend to hold our interest because we're always seeing those numbers go up. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm sure you've probably played one of the Diablo games at some point in your life,
Oh my
Jamie.
God, Diablo 3 is one of those games that I go back to maybe every year or two and play like a season of it. So yeah, I've played a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just right there. Yes, we're fighting the same zombies or whatever the heck they're called, but we have higher numbers now, or our gear's a little bit shinier, and it can be endless given the right design, the right standpoint. But
Hmm.
I think for me there is a limit. I think there comes a point where if the game isn't properly challenging me, it doesn't matter if I can do 100 times the damage of the enemy or 500 times without something to keep going or someone to keep shooting
Hmm.
for. It tends to fall out. Like I'm pretty sure I brought this up when we last spoke, Jamie, but like even with Diablo 3, once I get to the torment levels, I kind of just tend to lose interest. Like it doesn't feel like there's anything more for me to achieve once I got my chosen set fully specced out.
Yeah, that's a lot of it for Diablo in
Mm-hmm.
specific is building out those sets and getting the synergies to work so that you become
Mm-hmm.
just obscenely powerful and can can like do dungeon runs really quickly. And once you have that complete set and maybe like the most powerful set or combination of items for your play style, then there's nothing really left to do except maybe get like the super legendary items or whatever they are that they added a while back, where it's got like a little red border around the item icon, and those are like really rare, like even more rare than the green and orange items that you would try to get before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I felt usually fall off of Diablo for a while.
Yeah.
Getting to that point, it's like, oh, okay, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And I've become a lot more sensitive to that as my life has had less time
Mm-hmm.
for long gaming stretches.
Mm-hmm.
Where like I fell off of Assassin's Creed Origins pretty quickly, even though I kind of liked the world and it was fun, but I was just like, okay, I'm spending too much time just riding on a camel
Yeah.
from location to location and not much interesting is happening in between.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like the previous Assassin's Creed games were a lot more fun because the traversal, from moment to moment was more
Yes.
entertaining and more fun. And for whatever reason, I just kind of got bored with AC Origins.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and it's one of the things I see for a lot of open world games. So what I was really expecting of Breath of the Wild, where
Mm,
the only real interest are those POIs or points of interest on the map, and everywhere else, nothing really is happening.
yeah.
And that just kills. I think that's one of the things that does kill my enjoyment of a lot of these open world style games, where I know I'm going to have to spend the next 10 minutes going in some direction way over there, and I'm going to do something exciting. But the whole 10 minutes of me heading there and then coming back, nothing's going to happen in that time. It's just wasted travel time in a sense.
Yeah, although Breath of the Wild, sometimes it's like that, but then sometimes it's like, okay, I'm heading over to this
Mm-hmm.
location on the map, but oh, there's a shrine, or oh,
Exactly.
there's like an NPC, or oh, here's a
Mm-hmm.
stable that I didn't know was there, or here's just like a random Moglin camp that I can go, jack
Mm-hmm.
them up and take their
Yep.
stuff. So it's kind of a densely packed world, but I think once you get to the point where like I don't need to fight any more moblins because I have like
Mm-hmm.
good equipment already, and that's just going to slow me down. So now it's just annoying
Mm-hmm.
when they start shooting arrows at me or whatever.
Yeah. And King Me and chat brought up a very quite a good point about the Disgaea series regarding grinding. Have you ever played any of the Disgaea games, Jamie?
Oh, yeah, I think I played about a couple of hours of one on the PlayStation 2. So let's say no.
Yeah. Well, those games are the very definition of
This is
grinding
like
based titles.
they're like turn-based strategy games,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah.
And the whole like turn-based combat is just basically like the front for this endless grinding of characters. You can go into gear and upgrade them. You can upgrade shops. You can upgrade. He mentioned in chat there's specialists that you can attach to weapons that boost them, but you can also go into weapons to upgrade the specialists, and it is just insane. Like the number of things.
Yeah.
And it goes on. I mean, these are games where like 80 to 100 hours is considered light when you play a SCADA game. They will go on easily like 300 plus hours. I know there's people
Ugh.
who's probably spent a good 1,000 hours because you can literally take your characters up to like level 9,999 and let them do like 1,000,000 points of damage. I've seen
Yeah.
people who that's considered like a badge of honor, is building their characters in a way that you can do 1,000,000 damage per hit. And the game really doesn't reward you in a sense for doing that. I mean, you start going down that rabbit hole and you will break the main story. I
Yeah.
mean, you can do that within like 10 minutes of playing the game. You start grinding out item worlds and upgrading weapons, and it's like, who cares about strategy? Here's 10 million points of damage. Who's
Overwhelming
going to really
power.
stop me right
Right.
there? And I kind of run to that same point where I could spend 500 hours playing that game, but why? Why
Yeah.
should I? What's there to make me want to do it other than just saying, you've achieved level 900, you've achieved level 5,000, and so on?
Yeah. I don't get why people put that much time into games either. And I think they are probably the outliers in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, people that play those games. Um, and you sometimes hear crazy stories about, who's it? Like there was a guy that like leveled his characters in Final Fantasy VII up to the max level in the tutorial area
Mm-hmm.
just by doing random encounters over
Oh
and over
God.
again for like years. And he just did it like to basically prove that he
Mm-hmm.
could, like to settle an argument with somebody on a message board, I think it was, who said that he couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And then he did.
And I know obviously the min max pool is strong, being able to figure out the best way of doing something in as little time as
Hmm.
possible. I mean, that right there is basically the main point of playing a lot of the idle and clicker games. And
Yeah.
have you gotten like sucked into any of those like I did, Jamie?
No, no. And probably only because I never played them, because
Mm,
I look at it and I think that's ridiculous. I would play that way too much. Well,
yeah.
I take it back. I played the original Idle game back in the day in the early 2000s, Progress Quest,
Mm,
which was a game that would just run in the background on your computer,
mm,
and you just let it go forever.
mm.
And it was sort of the progenitor of the modern clickers,
Yeah.
idle clickers. But yeah, like Cookie Quest
Oh
and
yeah.
uh, all
They're
those other ones. No, I never got into them.
lucky you.
Yeah,
I got hooked on one that was built on like I think Dungeons and Dragons last year. That was in early access, and I
really.
just basically just had to again. I just had to cut myself off cold turkey to stop playing those games because
Uninstall.
exactly. Gareth asking chat, what's my opinion on new game pluses, where you're just repeating it by a higher level? I've just never really enjoyed new game plus in a game because it kind of felt
Yeah.
like I'm just kind of I guess on a victory lap at that point. I'm not really playing the game anymore when I'm 50 levels above everything else. I guess for
Yeah.
you, Jamie, do you play like new game plus modes in titles?
No, I don't have that much time to spend with a game. The few times that I replay games, like I played Dark Souls 3 like 3 times. I
Mm-hmm.
played each of the Dark Souls games multiple
Oh
times.
yes.
Um, I'll try a different build
Mm-hmm.
entirely, or I'll want to go down a totally different character path, character progression, or character choice, instead of just taking the existing one back to the beginning with more numbers.
Yeah.
So if I do want to replay a game, I'll want to do it. I'll only want to do it if I can have a substantially different experience with it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I've replayed Bloodborne, Dark Souls, you name it, but I
Yeah.
just have no interest in like New Game Plus or Plus Plus, or I know it's like up to like 7 or 8 different pluses, and that like to give you a counter example, Neo, if you had a chance to play that one.
I did. I never finished it. I got close, but ended up not finishing it.
Yeah. In Neo, what they did was each difficulty, Oscar just pointed out, they introduced new enemies and new kinds of
Mm,
gear. So similar to what Diablo did, with you get if you don't play it on I think Torment 1 or higher, you don't get access to all the loot table variances that are in the
right.
game. So like in Neo, they add in divine level gear. Then they add in enemies that have special modifiers. Then they add something else in to make it harder. Like it wasn't just throwing numbers at you. And I think
Yeah.
that's where I would play a new game plus, when you are legitimately giving me a different experience than I was the first time I played it, or the second time, and so on.
Yeah, but even there, I think I would only do that if they gave you like a new weapon set
Yeah,
or something, or if the enemy placement in levels was substantially different,
yeah, for
or
sure.
different types, which I think Neo did do, right?
Yeah. I know
Yeah,
on the hardest, I think it's like New Game 4 pluses. I think they do move every enemy
four
around.
pluses.
I know
Yeah,
it gets very weird to describe this stuff.
yeah. But yeah, I don't generally do that, but I can imagine some people doing it, like just to max out, like the Persona games. It's kind of hard. You have to play in a very specific way in order to like max out all your abilities on the first playthrough. And those like different aspects of the game, like different relationships with NPCs or even different content, is gated by having met thresholds and your different ability scores. So I could see somebody be like, okay, I want to play through and I want to like romance this other character and I want to make these different choices. And because I'm doing it in new game plus,
hmm
I can max out those ability scores and get to all that additional content. So that could, situation like that, it certainly makes sense.
Yeah. And you asking Chad, is replayability always good? I say for the most part it is, but it depends on what exactly I'm doing, as we just said. If I'm just repeating the same exact thing, but this time I do, 1,000 points of damage instead of 500, it's not going to hold my interest. If the
Hmm.
game can legitimately give me different experiences each time I play, such as the roguelike genre, then yeah, I will play that game. Like I've spent over 100 hours playing The Binding of Isaac just because of how different it is. I know people have spent probably even more than that playing Spelunky over the years.
Right. Never got into either of those, but Dead Cells, I got sort of a similar
Oh,
vibe from.
for sure. And while I'm waiting for some chat to come through, I wanted to turn things around and ask you this question, Jamie. What about games that don't have an internal progression in terms of how can they keep people playing? And I'll give you the example that's right now on everybody's mind.
Sea of Thieves.
There we go.
Yeah,
You read
that's where
my
my
mind.
mind. Yeah, my mind went there too. I haven't played Sea of Thieves, but I've watched some streams and
Yeah.
read some reviews and listened to some people on podcasts talk about it. And yeah, it doesn't seem to have any sort of internal progression system. At least nothing that's exposed to the player, right?
hmm
You go and you do your thing, and you don't level up, you don't get better weapons in the way that you do in other games.
hmm
Um, and that description of the game made it pretty much dead on arrival for me. Like
hmm
I'm just not interested. I think that if it had more interesting like open world and multiplayer stuff to do, then that could be fun. Where the fun wasn't in the progression; it was in the emergent situations that you found yourself in. Vis-a-vis interactions with other players or like colliding systems and artificial intelligence that's doing weird, interesting things and like, oh no, here comes a storm, but there's also like a horde of skeletons coming, and something interesting happens because of that. Like Vermintide too is another. To go back to that example, like that's sort of what makes that game interesting. Like those situations where you get like, oh crap, it's a horde and two specials and like and oh the dwarf wandered off by himself. So
Or in my team last night, the Giants just decided to like punt everybody off a
yeah,
cliff.
yeah, that's happened to me too.
hmm
Like where that sort of emergent stuff happens because, yeah, like systems are colliding. Like
hmm
that could be fun.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun in like the modern Fallout games that had nothing to do with my character level or what special scores I had or what perks I was working towards, because it was just like weird, crazy stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in Far Cry 5
Oh yeah,
too, like
that's what I'm
that
hearing.
happens all the time too, where like, suddenly there are bears and they're like messing up your plan to take over this outpost, and here comes a car and a helicopter and all kinds of crazy stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's alternatives to progression systems to motivate people. Obviously, there's tons of games that rely on exploration and building, and finding out different things you can do and interacting with other players and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I agree with you about that, Jamie. That like there are ways of doing this without needing an extensive progression curve. But as you said, there has to be something to make that experience different.
Hmm.
Because that I was hearing the same things as you were about Sea of Thieves. That just feels like we go to an island, the same exact thing happens every time. Maybe instead of the stronghold being on this side, it's over here this time. But
Right.
the same exact, it's just the same loop happening over and over again, but without that level of variance. Like it sounds like they need more, I guess, levers to pull to make the experience different each time. Something,
Hmm.
again, going back to like a Spelunky or a Dead Cells, where I'm doing the same thing, but what's happening or what's going to push me through is going to be different each time. Vermintide 2, and even something like Left 4 Dead with the Eye Director being an obvious example. As you
Hmm.
said, one time going through a mountain pass, it could be nothing. The next time we could get hit by 3 Gatling guns and a
Excuse me,
Stormbringer.
rattling guns.
Oh, I'm sorry, rattling guns just
So
showing up
dumb.
out of the blue to mess with you.
Yeah.
And again, the basic experience is the same. I'm going from point A to point B. But everything in between, though, who the heck knows what could possibly happen?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're still trying to finish the level so you can gain experience and get
Mm-hmm.
loot, but it's fun to do it in its own right. And that's ideal, right?
Yeah,
Is to both have the moment to moment gameplay and those emergent systems and
the long
other things that
term.
appeal to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Sea of Thieves just doesn't seem to have any of that stuff, at least from what I've seen. Like I said, I haven't played it, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my impression.
Yeah. And that moment to moment gameplay, again, I think keeping with our topic in terms of motivation is such a key part. And goes back to what I was saying with that Space Sim game. That moment to moment for that game, I wasn't enjoying myself. Maybe in 20, 30 hours of, reading guides online and following tutorial prompts, I would get to that point of being able to enjoy it. But
Mm.
if I'm if I lose that interest, it's going to be hard for me to get it back. The same goes for like the open world genre. Did you play Horizon Zero Dawn by any chance?
I loved every minute of it. Yep.
I did not like that game. It just did
What?
not hook me. And again, the same thing happened. Like I just wasn't enjoying myself
Wow.
in the short run or in the short term, and it just never managed to light that fire in me.
Mm.
But then again, I can play a game like Vermintide 2. I'm up to, I think, like 30, 40 hours in it. I got 800 hours out of Left 4 Dead. So it can just be very hard to get the player at that point that they want to keep playing. And it sounds like with Sea of Thieves that there's just nothing for someone to grab onto. But
Hmm.
I do want to point out, let me get who said that. Gareth said this. I think it was a really good point that it is a team-based game, and these social interactions can be a major point in order to
Hmm.
keep someone invested. I mean, again, we brought this up 2 years ago with MMO design, but the MMOs that last the longest, it's not because people are playing these games just for the content. They're playing them for, the friends they make and the guilds they join and so on.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a big piece of it, and having friends and outside of the games that you bring into the game to play together, to have like a regular scheduled game night, or you get on Discord and say, hey, who's up for doing this raid,
Hmm.
in Destiny 2 or whatever. I just don't have that. Like I have friends that play video games, but like we just don't coordinate that way.
Oh, yes.
We're never going to get together and be like, hey, let's play some Vermintide, or let's do this raid or whatever. It just hasn't ever worked out that way for me.
Yeah, me too. It's just basically all of a sudden I get a message on Steam saying you want to play Vermintide 2? Okay. Like it could come at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 12:30
Yeah,
at night, and then okay, there we go.
yeah, yeah.
Indy wanted to ask you, Jamie, do you have a YouTube channel?
I do, but it's not very active. I used to post like my podcast there, and then I stopped posting my podcast there as a way to sort of simplify my
Yeah.
life. So no, you gotta. I just really have the podcast and the occasional video that I've done over the years. You can find there. God, I don't even know what the URL is. If you go to the blog at psychologygames.com, it's be pretty easy to track down.
hmm I need to do that at some point. Just try and simplify because I post everywhere, and it does
Hmm.
get very draining on your time.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
hmm But getting back to the topic, let me just do a quick time check. We are over the hour in, so I figure we'll probably, unless any major topics come up, we'll probably wrap things up in like the next 15-20 minutes. If that works for you, Jamie.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. And for you folks watching live, this will be, I guess, first warning for any final questions regarding either any psychology based questions on game design or on our main topic of motivation in games. But getting back to it, as we in the first part, we kind of talked about motivating people to play games built with microtransactions. I want to touch on that here regarding the CCG genre. Because as you said earlier, when it came to loot boxes, they are akin to the same kind of allure of opening up a booster pack for a game.
Hmm.
And CCG games can be another one of those titles that can be very tricky to hook players in. Because once you get them hooked, they will usually stick around. But
Yeah.
it's kind of forcing people into the old adage of, bringing a knife to a gunfight. That the longer it takes, or the longer a game is out, the harder it feels to get into these titles. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Jamie, regarding keeping that motivation going when this game, everyone else playing the game is going to be 1,000 times better than you. How do you make that new player experience alluring for someone at that point?
Oh, geez. I don't know. If I knew the secret sauce there, I
Yeah.
would probably be working for game developers. Like I think one answer, the obvious one maybe, is just to segregate players, right?
hmm
You have adequate player base to do matchmaking, where you can put new players up against each other. That's ideal, and they always play against new players outside of any like tournament setting where you would want them to play against more advanced players. Making the expansion packs more available and cheaper over time would probably encourage people to pick those up instead of being like, okay, if I want to buy everything, it's going to be like $400 or something crazy. um, Beyond that, it probably becomes a balancing issue where you have to have anything from the beginning pack up be a viable approach, that you could win in most or any cases with if you just play very well with the starter pack.
hmm
And that might be difficult. I would imagine that would be difficult. I'm not a game designer, so I can't say for sure, but educated guess says that like the more uh, content you add and the more cards and the more effects and the more complication and complexity you add, the harder it is to balance stuff and keep
hmm
it balanced.
Yeah, I know. When I spoke with one of the designers on Duelist, we talked about that as well. That
Mm.
again, for every new card you add, it throws even more potential imbalances into your game. I know
Mm-hmm.
Gwent did something similar where they did go back and adjust all these starter packs after
Yeah.
they did more in terms of the game balance and adding in new systems. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that is a good way forward. We have a few questions in chat, but I wanted to bring up a point that I forgot in the last part that I think works here. And that was what you were talking about regarding when developers have to basically balance monetization with game design. And you, of course, brought up, if someone has to nerf a weapon or something that someone paid
Mm.
for. And that, I think, is a very important point, and one that's going to, I think, rear its head more and more as developers embrace games as a service and in-game transactions. And it leads to that very interesting discussion. If I release an item that everybody buys because it's so good, does that add weight to it if it comes time for nerfing or a balance round?
Yeah. Uh, you're never going to make everybody happy.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not sure why developers couldn't just say, okay, we're going to refund you the cost of that item because we're making this drastic change to it, and or give you in-game credit equivalent to what you spent to get it, so that you can buy something else. That would seem fair to me. Or just to say, to explain the reasons why you made the change that you did. So my dissertation was actually on had to do with like perceptions of fairness in it's like in the workplace and different contexts, but a lot of the literature on what people think of as fair or unfair in terms of like when a decision is made, was that decision fair or unfair? There's actually like a pretty good list of like 6 or 7 different things that people will look to decide whether or not the decision you made was fair or unfair. And I wrote about this on the website fairly extensively about like Overwatch and Blizzard and like all the balancing changes they made to characters, and they like totally rework a character every now and again. And what they do really well is that Jeff Kaplan comes out there with a long video where he like breaks it down. It's like, this is why we did this. Here's the data that we have. And so he provides explanations. He gives people a chance to play test the change on the PTR before it takes place. And he says, like, here's where you can go to leave comments. So it's like a two-way communication, and just does a really good job of sort of explaining why that decision was made, and sort of checks off a lot of those things that make people more likely to think that a decision is quote unquote fair or just. Yeah. And a lot of it comes down to then just like how you treat your players and how much you explain the reasons for what you're doing versus just saying like, we know what's best. Just this, we did it and it's good this way, and shut up and play the game.
Yeah.
Which you occasionally see as well, and is slightly less successful.
And again, a lot of very good points there, Jamie. And Overwatch, I think, being another really great example. As you said, they have made some fundamental changes to those characters over the course of its development. I know Symmetrica got something. I think,
Diva.
yeah, I think, did Farrah get an update, or I maybe think of another character.
Yeah, I mean, she's been tweaked, but it was like Mercy. Diva, Farrah are kind of gone through the biggest changes. Yeah.
And that's always the challenge of keeping these games fresh. And that's actually another big point about long-term motivation, of keeping someone playing these games for months, even years at a time. That you have to keep things changing, but you can't change them so far that people feel like, the whole rug's been pulled out from underneath them. And it can be very hard to balance, as you said, that perception of fairness. What if my favorite character, because of X, Y, and Z, you get rid of X, Y, and Z? What do I do now? Like, and I think, as you said earlier, I think one of the simplest things is that you can't please everybody all the time.
Yeah. It even goes back to an earlier point I made where they're looking at groups and they're trying to maximize the total utility and enjoyment that people are getting. And just, gosh, I don't know, these Widowmaker players, we can't make them happy, so I guess we'll just give up. Like, that's not a very good strategy either.
Let me see. Indy asked a question. This one probably will be maybe too big, but he was asking, I guess, what are the fundamentals of psychology and game design? I guess for you, Jamie, what's your, I guess, mission statement when it comes to how psychology can be applied to video games?
Read my blog. Or if that's not enough, then go pick up the book. No, I think that psychology, and especially things like social psychology and psychology of decision making and cognitive psychology, to the extent that it addresses things like perception and how much information we can take in and how we use it, which gets played in a lot into like user experience and design, that sort of stuff. There are a lot of very fundamental theories about psychology that have been used to explain our behavior in society, our behavior in the marketplace, our behavior in the workplace, and so forth. And those same theories can also explain why games are designed the way they are so often, or why certain game design tropes exist, and why they work is because they're based on people. They're related to people, and there are lots of things that keep showing up when you look at the way that people, think and behave and make judgments and experience emotions and do all of these human things that we do. So it's always really fascinating for me, and sort of the most fun that I have with the blog is, and the podcast and the book and everything else is like, I'll read something interesting in the psychology literature and I'll think, wow, how can that be used to explain why games are designed as they are, or how they could be designed better, or the experiences that we have with other players. Like, how does this explain, even though it's in a totally different context, usually a bunch of undergraduate students in a lab, but even if not, it's rarely in the context of video games. So that's sort of what I enjoy doing the most, is finding how those things can be applied to this brand new context, and sort of suggesting ways that they could be studied in the context of video games,
Yeah.
or at least experimented and played with.
I think that's a really good point there, Jamie, about how, again, a lot of things that make video games and by extension game design work come from the person's experience of it. And it can be
Mm-hmm.
very hard, I think, to put that into words. Why a section feels harder to somebody. Why, they're happy about, overwhelming challenge in some players, and while other people don't want that. And again, Indy is asking a lot of theoretical questions in chat that if we got to, we'll be here for like another 4 or 5 hours, I bet. But it is a very fascinating topic. Again, game design, kind of like from my own side, is not something that's readily explored, I think, as much as it should be. Not just in terms of psychology, but again, just in terms of the overwhelming philosophies of what it means to make these games.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be, I think, tricky to try and put into words or try to create these like standardized elements. I guess as a follow-up question for you, do you think, like, we hear from a lot of people, especially first-time students or first-time developers, like things to study to improve their own ability to make games? Do you think
Mm.
psychology is something that is useful for game development?
Nah, not really. I I think the last 8 years of my life have been maybe misplaced. Yeah, totally. I think it's applicable. I think it is more or less applicable depending on what part of the gaming industry you're going into. If you're just building pathfinding algorithms and AI, it's less. But if you're building user experience, it's way more. Or if you're building community tools, then it's way more. So I think that understanding, if you're a game designer, having an understanding of some basic elements of cognitive
Mm-hmm.
psychology, again, about like how do things like learning and attention and memory work. Those things are very important. And there's a great new book by Celia Hodent, who used to work at Epic Games in the user experience realm, where she talks a lot about that sort of stuff. And I just read it recently, so that's kind of why it's at the top of my mind. If you're developing community management tools, then knowing about social psychology and sort of how people take cues from their environment or other people in their environment, how things like tribalism and team orientation work, and how people behave in groups versus individually, and how things like de-individuation and loss of identity can affect how people play games with one another, or how they treat people one another. Like, those all things can all suggest different ways to approach things like matchmaking or building teams, or putting three people from a friends list on a group with another person to round out a team of four. All these different kinds of things can be informed by psychology. If you're marketing games and you're developing in-game purchasing systems, then understanding some certain things about consumer psychology and how people treat money, and how people do put money into different mental accounts, for example, when they spend or receive credit for something, that can be really useful to understand. So I mean, I could go on and on, but there's lots of different ways that psychology totally applies to games. And then, there's topics that are the psychology of video games in its own right, where you're talking about, the effects of violent imagery on people from playing video games, and gaming addiction, and how people form relationships, interpersonal relationships in games, things that have been studied specifically in the context of video games, as opposed to what I was talking about before, where they'd be studied in different contexts, and it's interesting to apply them differently. There's growing body of research and growing, armies of researchers who are making careers out of studying these kinds of things because they grew up playing video games, and they want to sort of marry that interest with their interest in academia and science and psychology and communication theory and economics and all of that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I agree with you, I think, on all counts there, Jamie, about the importance of psychology when it comes to video games, especially when it comes to, there's been a few questions in chat, I think, from India about trying to understand what makes something new work, or how is someone brand new supposed to
Mm-hmm.
look at this game. And again, we could spend another hour or two just on that just very question there. But being able to see, okay, how is this going to be responded by players, and then being able to
Mm-hmm.
take that information, and essentially you're trying to read someone in terms of what they're going to like or they don't like. And as you said, in terms of marketing, that's another big point. If you read your market wrong when you advertise your game, well, that can easily be a sinker, as the infamous My Number Nine, the make an anime fan
Right.
cry like on prom night debacle happen. And again, there's a lot here that we can certainly talk about. And if you're free in the future, Jamie, we can certainly have you back on for. Again, we can
Yeah.
just pick a topic. We have just like a giant roulette wheel in the background. There you go with the gambling, and just see what topic we'll talk about in relation to psychology and games.
Yeah, totally. It's always fun to talk shop about this sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and talk about video games in the broader sense. So yeah, hit me up.
All right. Well, with that said, we are coming up on an hour and 20 into the stream, so we will probably begin to wrap things up. So, for you folks watching live, this is going to be official last call for any questions for the two of us. But while we're waiting for that ever popular delay in chat, I guess for you, Jamie, are there any topics that relating to psychology and games, motivation, or even just from our first part that we didn't talk about that you'd like to bring up now?
Nothing comes to mind. No, we covered a lot of ground the last hour and a half or so, and there's probably more that can be said about any of those, individual topics. But yeah, I think we hit a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess here's my final question then,
Hmm?
and I'm sure this will be in keeping with the theme of 2018. I guess, what are your thoughts on the whole battle royale allure and people coming back and playing that
Mm.
game over and over again?
Yeah, that's a weird one, isn't it? Especially the way that Fortnite just came out and ate everybody's lunch, and
Mm-hmm.
especially PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds lunch, which seemed like a very large lunch
Mm-hmm.
indeed. Um, it's probably something that we'll see get tossed into a lot of other games in the future, like this battle royale mode, if it,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a separate mode. But the thing is that you got to have a huge player base to handle, or at least like the 100 player battle royale mode. And but then if you if you have like, oh, it's a 12 player battle royale, like, no, that's just deathmatch.
Mm-hmm.
That's not battle royale. Um, so I think we'll see a lot more of it, but it'll probably be limited to sort of the big games that can do that just because they command the number of players, or it'll be additional free to play games that manage to catch on.
Yeah. I think taking this back to like kind of the issue we saw with Sea of Thieves, I think what
Mm,
makes Battle Royale so popular again is the moment to moment variance that can happen when you're playing these games. We know
yeah,
at the end of a Battle Royale game there's always going to be one player left standing. But again, everything that happens from point A to point Z, that's entirely up to chance and luck and just what's happening in that match. And it does lead to, again, that very exciting gameplay of not knowing how things are going to go.
yeah, yeah. Just hide in the bathtub is apparently the moment to moment gameplay for me, because that's all I ever do, and it doesn't work out too well.
My moment to moment gameplay of PUBG is just having my computer blow up trying to run it. So I think
Oh
you've
yeah,
gotten further than me. Let's
yeah.
see.
I've had a lot more luck with Fortnite.
I think at some point maybe I'll get pressured by enough people to try and install that and just see how badly I do there.
Yeah, it's easy to jump into. And I can just put it on your phone, right? If
I
the
know it's
mobile edition's out.
crazy.
I haven't tried that yet, but I should.
Here's a quick question, or hopefully a quick one. Why do you think social games are only fun with other players? I guess, what do you think about that one? Is the game
So,
fun or the players? I guess that was the second part of that.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess it would be an intersection of the two. If you have just a group of players, then that's just called a chat room, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you have activities for you to either cooperate or compete to do, then that lends a whole nother level and a whole nother sort of aspect to those social relationships and dynamics that develop. So I would say it's both.
All right. Yeah, I would say the same way. Again, the social aspect can be that X factor for a
Mm.
lot of these games. Again, the designers can only create so much content in the span of months or even years. But if you have players basically providing that content for free, whether it's by interactions or by doing stuff in game, that can
Mm.
go on forever. I know Ramin, I think, talked extensively about that kind of player created content as a major pool. And again,
Yeah.
you just never
Uh,
know like where that social interaction can go.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to like Monster Hunter World, which has a weird mishmash of different social interactions. Where my favorite way to play that game was just to go in and either shoot off an SOS flare to summon other players immediately, or to answer other players' SOSs and do it in four-person, hunting teams that would then go take down a monster. But then, like when you went back to the hub, the city, there were no other players around. It was, I kind of expected something like they have in Destiny and Destiny 2, where you go back to the hub in that world and you're not really interacting with
Mm-hmm.
players, right? You can't even like talk to them, but it is something interesting to have
Mm-hmm.
other people there running around doing silly stuff. Obviously not being obvious, not NPCs. Sort of added a different atmosphere to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I'm going with that thought. Just sort of came to mind.
Yeah. And Nia was asking, what do you think the future of multiplayer games is? I think that's probably a little bit too big at this point to get into.
Collectible card battle royale loot boxes.
There we go.
Now,
Perfect. You should pitch that to EA, Jamie. I'm sure they'll hire you as the game designer
oh
there.
yeah, if anyone could pull it off, it would be them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me see. What are we up to? Yeah, we're about to hit an hour and a half. I know. Like I said earlier in chat, I have dinner waiting. I'm sure you probably have to get. I'm sure you may have dinner or something waiting for you in the future.
Yeah, I gotta get the kids to bed and play some Far Cry.
All right. So I think we will wrap things up here for tonight. Again, Jamie, it was a pleasure hanging out with you on the stream. And
Same.
like I said, if you'd like to come on, I can send you a message, or you can just feel free to bug me if there's any topics that came to mind that you want to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome. So, again, for folks watching us live, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out Jamie's site. Again, I linked it up here, psychologyofgames.com, as well as the Amazon link to his book.
You're
And
too kind.
for you, Jamie, when do you put up your podcast for people who want to give it a listen?
I usually put it up about the middle of the month. So whatever is around the 15th, sort of depending, I won't put it up on like a Saturday or Sunday. I'll wait until Monday. But yep, it usually hits around the middle of the month.
All right. Well, with that said, we will end things here. If you wouldn't mind hanging on Skype for like 1 minute after we wrap things up, Jamie, I just have a few things to
Sure,
ask
sure.
you. But
Yep.
for you folks watching either live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to join our Discord where we chat about games and all manner of topics. You'll find the link down below. If you like support Game Wisdom, we have our Patreon, which will allow you to get access to our grab bag voting and more features on the Discord. That's at patreon.com/GWBicer. But other than that, thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, and if you're watching this recorded and would like to get this talk ad-free, VIP supporters get that through the Patreon. But other than that, we're going to end things here for now. I will be back on later tonight to play some Darksiders, probably in like an hour and a half or so. I guess, Jamie, do you do any streaming by any chance?
No, I thought about it, and then I didn't. So,
Well, that's the story right there. So
yeah.
I will see you guys later this evening. And like I said, be sure to check out Jamie's site and his book. And I'm sure we'll have you back on again in the future.
Cool, cool.
All right. So until next time, folks, have a great evening. I'm going to go get something to eat, and I will see you all later. Till then, take care.
Take care.